and I'm going to talk to you today about my research. The title of my research is Student Rationale for Self-Placement into First-Year Composition, Decision-Making, and Directed Self-Placement. Now this research on directed self-placement is in response to a standardized placement exam that high school students take. So DSP imagines students a little bit differently. So in order to take ourselves back to when we were in high school, I'd like you to think about an exam that you took as a high school student and you got a score that you felt wasn't exactly indicative of your skill set. You got this score and you said, oh man, I know I can do better. So keep that in mind as I do my presentation. So the first thing is, what is directed self-placement? Directed self-placement, also called DSP, was first created by Royer and Giles in the late 90s, and it was in response to placement procedures that they felt did not capture the complexity of student learning. So when students come into high school, or excuse me, come into college, in California, they take the English placement test, sorry, it's a little dark now. They take the English placement test, the EPT. They receive a single score based on that exam, and they're put into a first-year composition course. Now, directed self-placement, on the other hand, imagines that students, not a single test score, are the best means of course placement. So with that in mind, that little background, I'm going to talk about what incoming freshmen do when they do DSP at San Francisco State. I'm going to talk about my qualitative research project, as well as the 4 findings that came from that research. And then I'm going to spend some time talking about the future. What can we do with this research? Okay. So the first thing is that this is what students complete or when they do DSP. So the first thing is that they become familiar with the 3 course options that we have at San Francisco State. The first is a 1-semester program, a more typical course that you might think of, English 114. The second is what we call the stretch program, English 104, 105. And the third is the Composition for Multilingual Students program. So once students become familiar, I should also mention, all 3 of these courses have the same outcome, the same student learning outcomes, but they go about it at differently based on the student population. Okay, so once students are familiar with that, they read and annotate a text. They're also given reading tips if they choose to use those or not. They compose a response to that text, which they upload onto the website. And then they're asked a series of questions about themselves as readers, writers, and learners. Now, based on those questions, they're given a recommendation for a course to take. So this student was recommended to take English 114, but ultimately, the decision is up to the student. So current research on DSP is very quantitative. It's looking at what courses are students choosing, what are their retention rates over time, these sorts of questions. I, on the other hand, wanted to actually talk to the students to find out what they had to say about this process that we're having them participate in, figure out if it's working for them and how they're making their decision. So my 2 sort of research questions, the first is, how do students make their decision? So how, when they're completing DSP, what helps them choose the course that they choose? And how do they perceive the outcome of their choice over the semester? So I was talking to them at multiple times over that first semester of college. My methodology, I recruited 6 students, 3 who self-selected into English 114, and 3 who self-selected into the year-long stretch course. I used multiple interviews, so we met either 2 or 3 times over the semester, and interview times averaged 52 minutes. And I used an interview guide so as to allow the students to really dictate the narrative that they were sharing with me. So an early question might be, what was the deciding factor, which would branch into many different discussions. And later I might ask a question like, looking back, how do you feel about your decision? So based on those questions, there were 4 findings that came from my discussions with students. The first is that students' comfort level using quotes in an academic essay had the largest impact on their decision-making process. So because DSP at our institution has them complete an authentic assignment, they're using quotes. And they use that as an indicator of what course they would be best for. So Jessica here never learned how to use quotes in an academic essay. So for her and 1 other participant, this was enlightening for them. They learned that they had something they needed to learn a little bit more in order to succeed. So Jessica said the DSP essay was a lot different than high school. I wasn't sure if I was doing it right. So for her and the other participant who hadn't learned how to use quotes, they chose the year-long course in order to get that foundational knowledge to help them succeed. I should also mention there were 2 students who felt a little stifled by having that one particular text, and they felt so confident doing research that they felt that was a sign that they should take the one semester course. The next thing is that students are experts on their learning. It's hard for us to imagine sitting here today, but when students come to the CSU, they've had 12 years of educational information collecting. They know themselves as learners, and it's important that we capitalize on that hard-won knowledge. So Sandy here was telling me about a high school instructor who had high expectations, didn't accept late work. It was hard, but I learned a lot. So for students like Sandy who knew they needed a fast-paced course, the one semester course was the best for them. Others knew that they needed more time to compose essays, complete readings, etc., and they made that decision based on that information. The next is that anxiety actually fueled engagement. So a few students, they make this decision and they have to live with it, as one participant told me. So, but it's a positive thing. They actually use this to help them find success. So Esther made her DSP selection, went to freshman orientation, said I started freaking out. I decided to just go for it. So for students that were nervous, they found this was an opportunity not to prove to anyone else, not to prove to instructors or other people, but to prove to themselves that they were capable of finding success, and proving to themselves that they had made the right decision. The next is that students, and I think this is a really interesting one, in my opinion, is that students saw social justice implications within DSP. So Kathy is a recent immigrant, and she would have definitely been placed into CMS, Composition for Multilingual Students. She said she had a great outlook. She said, if you don't take a risk, you're stuck in your comfort zone. So for students who came across linguistic barriers in high school, like the ESL tracks, for example, this was an opportunity to step outside of that. Other students found this was an opportunity to use their money in the way that they felt was best. They're paying for college now, and they wanted to have that opportunity to decide. Lastly, some students just knew that they were poor test takers. So those tests that they took were reflecting something that they didn't feel was accurate. So finally, they were making decisions for themselves. So what can we learn from these voices? The first is that 4 students recommended feedback on their DSP exam, which is interesting because we think about 18-year-olds and we say, oh, they don't care about their essays. It's not true. They spent time on this essay. They want to use it to become better. And the second thing is that I'm not here today to say that DSP works perfectly for every student at every institution, but for these 6 students, it was a really empowering and important opportunity for them. So, thinking about the future, I definitely want to talk to more students. I had 6 participants. They had really amazing stories to tell me, but we need more, right? So that's the first thing, gathering more students, and also students who self-selected into Composition for Multilingual Speakers as well. We want to hear what they have to say. Also, this is a really amazing time for DSP research because there are 4 CSUs that use DSP. There are 5 that are in an implementation phase, and the rest may be interested in knowing more. This is a great moment for cross-campus collaboration. And on that note, at my institution, we already use DSP. We're not going to go back unless, for the foreseeable future, we won't. So it's important for CSUs that are not using DSP to begin collecting data on how students feel about the placement process pre-DSP, so we have something to compare it to. Right? So overall, this has been a really rewarding project for me, and it's been great to see how this process really gives agency back to the students. They're in college, they're ready to learn, they want to make decisions, and this is a great opportunity for them. So with that, I say thank you, and you can contact me if you have more questions. Then yeah, thank you.
Will you talk a little bit more about why you chose to do a qualitative approach to your research?
Yeah, so there is a lot of quantitative data, which is great. That's a good place to start. We're starting to do some qualitative data, but I think this is really important because going into this process, we have preconceived ideas about students, freshmen, I think, I had some preconceived ideas as well going into this. And I think it's only when we can actually sit down and talk to a student for an hour over many meetings that we can capture this complexity. And I would be interested in doing even more time with students. They had so much to share. It was really rewarding for me. I think it was rewarding for them as well to tell their story. So yeah, I saw that gap and I wanted to collect qualitative data.
So along those lines, what is some of the quantitative evidence that's out there? And your results, like, are they consistent with what Haas has found, or is it complemented, or how does it fit in?
Yeah, so what we're seeing quantitatively is that students are actually making, at our institution we have these 3 choices. And from the outside we would think, oh, they want to select the 1 semester course, they want to get it done with, and that's not true. They actually are self-selecting the year-long course more often. So they are making these complex decisions. And also the retention issue, right? We want to keep students in our colleges. And we're actually finding that when they are able to self-select, they do have better retention over time. So that is, again, the agency, they're feeling like they're involved in this educational process and they want to stick it out and complete college.
So help me with the timeline here.
Yeah.
It's been a while since I've been in an undergrad program. So when students go in to take this placement exam, you had a link somewhere there about when they also then went into orientation, and so tell me that, and then I'll ask my next question.
Okay. So students take the EPT, the English Placement Test in California. They take the EPT in high school. I think it's typically their junior year. So they take that exam. But as far as DSP, so let's say I wanted to go to CSUN. So they would take my EPT score and I would be placed into a course. These students are doing DSP over the summer before they do freshman orientation. So they take this slip of paper that says, I chose English 114, and they go to their freshman orientation.
Okay, that's what I thought. And
Yeah.
so did you consider in your research questions the collaborative nature of that summer session and how students speak to each other about their decisions?
Right,
and
yeah.
what that ramification might have been?
Yeah, and that was an interesting point. Students often don't talk about DSP after they do it. And the students that I spoke to said, look, this is a big decision. We talk about other professors and other courses. This is actually an interesting time. I teach a course called Summer Bridge, and they used to do DSP, or they didn't do DSP for that group of students. And so now they'll be taking an 8-week course and completing DSP at the end. So there's going to be a lot more dialogue about the different options and what the different course decisions could mean.
Okay, so then that goes on my third, and maybe final question. So the teacher of those courses have a very fundamental role in this process.
Yes.
And so did you look at them and their...
I didn't, because this is brand new this summer, upcoming. So before that, the students that did Summer Bridge wouldn't do DSP. But yes, this is also an interesting point. Like you're giving feedback to a student on an essay over the summer before they do DSP, that can have a huge influence on their decision.
Right.
So that would be something for the future, definitely too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
So, as far as giving guidance to other CSU campuses and trying to implement this tool for course selection, what do you see the qualitative data that you collected, what impact do you think that can have in helping schools helping individual campuses decide whether or not they want to implement a tool like this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes, again, we just need to extend this conversation about DSP in general with quantitative and qualitative research. But I hope that this fills that gap, that they say, okay, well, we have these numbers, but we also have, again, the students that are completing this process are speaking about it and in a very complex and interesting ways. And I hope to share that information